Hello, I'm Jonathan Dunsky, author of the Adam Lapid Mysteries, and today I'd like to tell you about a historical thriller called The Killing Crew that was written by Maury Bailey. I first heard about The Killing Crew when Maury Bailey, the author, reached out to me, and he wrote that he was a fan of my Adam Lapid historical mysteries that are set in the state of Israel in the 1940s and 50s, and he wrote that he had also written a thriller set in about the same time in Israel in 1948, and he thought I might be interested in reading it, and I was, because I'm fascinated with that time period and that place, and I'm a big fan of thrillers and mysteries and crime fiction in general. So let me tell you a bit about the book, The Killing Crew, what's it about, the historical setting, and why I think it's an interesting book and that shows a different angle on a historical period that is very much still in the public consciousness in many places around the world. So The Killing Crew is set in June 1948, about a month after the State of Israel was established. And it is during Israel's War of Independence, but at a time of a truce between Israel and the foreign Arab armies, Arab countries whose armies had invaded the newly established Jewish state. And the hero of the book is a British military investigator by the name of Ash Carter, and he was sent to Israel by the British Army, by his superiors, along with another officer, to investigate or to find a number of British deserters who are said to have joined up in a sort of gang called the Killing Crew. Now, before I'll tell you more about Ash Carter and the actual story, I'd like to give you a bit of a historical background to the setting and why the choice of making the protagonist a British officer is interesting and fresh, something that I haven't seen before. So the land of Israel was for several centuries under the control of the Ottoman Empire until 1917. And the reason why it changed hands is because the Ottoman Empire joined up with Germany in the First World War. So in 1917, British imperial forces invaded that country, that region, and drove the Ottomans out. So the British became rulers of that region and established what was called the Mandate of Palestine. And the British remained in control of the region, of the land of Israel, and until 1948. In 1947, the United Nations decided to partition this land to create two states, one Jewish state and one Arab state. The Arabs refused the partition plan and started a war against the Jews. The Jews eventually won and the state of Israel was established. But this is not the whole story. What happened a bit before that is that a number of Jewish militant groups began targeting British soldiers and British officials in a series of militant attacks and operations in order to drive the British out, because the British, before the United Nations agreed on the partition plan, were not so keen to leave or to relinquish control of the land of Israel, and the Jews wanted them out so they could establish their own state. So these groups targeted British personnel, killing them, kidnapping them, blowing up police stations and railroads, and stealing weaponry and all sorts of stuff, and basically making the lives of British personnel stationed in the land of Israel hell. And this pressure, this campaign, was the main reason why the British eventually decided to leave. The British Empire was weakened after the Second World War, and they had to devote a large number of soldiers to maintain control of the land of Israel, and they decided that it was not worth it. And the British were those who eventually turned to the United Nations and told the United Nations, decide what you want to do with this region. So what happened is that in May 1948, the British evacuated their soldiers and their officials, but some British soldiers stayed behind, basically deserted from the army, and joined either the Jewish side or the Arab side in the war that happened. And actually the desertions started before the British officially left, because the war between Jews and Arabs began in November 1947, right after the United Nations decided on the partition plan. Now, some of these deserted, as I said, were pro-Jewish and joined the Jews, but most of them joined the Arabs. Some of them did it for money. Some did it because they hated Jews, and some were driven to join the Arabs because of the relentless militant campaign against them by these Jewish groups. And these deserters were not just advisors or regular soldiers. Some of them participated in horrific terroristic attacks on Jewish civilians. For instance, they were involved in an attack on the offices of what was then called the Palestine Post, which is a newspaper that exists to this day under the name the Jerusalem Post. This happened in February 1948. And British deserters were also involved in the bombing in Ben Yehuda Street in Jerusalem, also in February 1948. That bombing resulted in nearly 50 deaths in that bombing, and a terrific amount of damage to surrounding buildings. So these deserters, or the fact that there were British deserters who took part in terror activities, is something that is based in fact. So the killing crew that Ash Carter, the protagonist of the book The Killing Crew, is searching for, is one of these groups that was involved in terror attacks against Jews in the initial part of the war between Jews and Arabs, and are now said to be still around, still involved in fighting alongside the Arabs against the Jews. So just the premise of the story is something that is based in fact and is very interesting. What is also interesting is that when you read books about that time period, about the war of independence between Jews and Arabs, or the establishment of the State of Israel, you usually read characters or protagonists that belong to either of the two fighting sides, either the Jews or the Arabs. But here Maury Bailey chose to make his protagonist a British officer. You usually don't see, that third side of the triangle of that time, the British, as the heroes of the story, as the main characters. And I found that quite interesting, because you don't usually get the viewpoint of the British in relation to those historical events. So Ash Carter and another officer arrive in Israel, and the British at the time are basically hated by most of the Jews, because until recently the British were an enemy to be fought against, to drive out. They were the conquerors, the rulers, whom the Jews wanted to leave the land of Israel. But now the newly established State of Israel wants to have some sort of good relationship with Britain, and so they allow Ash Carter and his fellow officer Bill Wolfe, they give them permission to enter Israel and to conduct the investigation to find out where the killing crew is, who is involved, and so on. So Ash Carter arrives in Israel with Bill Wolfe, and they begin their investigation, and you immediately get a vivid sense of what life was like in Israel at the time. Even I, as someone who has researched that setting in that time period quite thoroughly in order to write my own novels, learned quite a few new things. And you get the sense, as Ash Carter walks the streets of Tel Aviv, that, Murray Bailey has done his research and is giving you a realistic setting, and you sort of get immersed into the writing. The book itself is part mystery and part thriller. I would say it's more a thriller than a mystery, even though there is mysteries to be solved and Ash Carter goes about solving them. But there is also a lot of action, a lot of tense moments, a lot of violent altercations, and it's all quite exciting. And there are also Jewish characters that become involved in the investigation, and you sort of get their viewpoint on things. And of course, there's the viewpoint of the British, and everything is. And you also see the some criminal elements in Israel at the time, and newly arrived immigrants to Israel, and so you get a full and deep picture of life in Israel at the time, all in the frame of this exciting and thrilling story. The pace is quick, the action is suspenseful, especially toward the ending, where there are a number of sort of twists and turns that took me quite by surprise. And it's a fast, easy read, quite exciting, quite thrilling. And if you're interested in that time period, and if you like thrillers, historical thrillers, I think this is a book that shows a viewpoint, or a new viewpoint, a fresh viewpoint on a time period that there are not a lot of thrillers set in it, and none that I've read that that are told from the viewpoint of a British character. I will tell you a bit about Ash Carter in general. Ash Carter appears in a number of books by Murray Bailey that are divided into two series. There is the Far East series that I think numbers 6 books that are set in Singapore a few years after The Killing Crew. Ash Carter is a military investigator who conducts his investigations in Singapore that at the time was still ruled by Britain. And there is the Near East series, of which The Killing Crew is book 2. One of the books is set in Cyprus, and that is set, as I said, in 1948 or a bit beforehand, and set in the Near East, in Cyprus, in the land of Israel. And again, Ash Carter is a military investigator conducting investigations for the British Army in that region. In general, I read one of the books in the Far East series, and of course I read The Killing Crew. And in general, you also, when you're reading those books, you also get the sense of the declining empire, the declining British Empire, still going about its business as an empire, but you see how it's weakened, how it's lost much of its glory, and you get sort of you become a witness to the process of its decline and even disintegration. And I also found that quite interesting as someone who likes history. So as I said, if you're a fan of historical thrillers and mysteries, and you're interested in the time period of the establishment of the State of Israel, give The Killing Crew a read. I think you'll enjoy it. You can find links in the description below to where you can find a copy of the book. And thank you for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.